The room went silent before Vice Admiral Elena Marisol Reyes said a single word. 4 generals stood in a perfect line beneath the vaulted ceiling of Hawthorne Point's reception hall, their hands raised in crisp salutes. Across from them, Elena wore no uniform, no medals, and no visible sign of the authority she carried. She stood in a simple navy blue suit, one hand resting against a small leather notebook, while a paper visitor badge lay on the polished floor beside her shoe. A few feet away, Lieutenant Blake Harrington remained frozen, with an empty serving tray in his hands. Less than a minute earlier, he had pushed that tray toward Elena and smiled for the small audience gathered around him. "Now you look like you have an assignment," he had said. "Maybe someone can finally explain what you're doing here." Someone behind him had laughed. Now no one moved. General Helen Crawford held her salute and looked directly at Elena. "Vice Admiral Reyes," she said, her voice carrying through the room, "the Joint Command delegation is prepared for your inspection." The tray slipped from Harrington's fingers and landed flat against the carpet. Elena returned the salute. Her expression did not change. She had spent 34 years learning that. The most revealing moments rarely arrived with warning. They happened in hallways, reception areas, elevators, and ordinary rooms where people believed consequences were far away. They happened when a person thought rank was invisible, authority was absent, and kindness was optional. 23 minutes earlier, Eleanor had entered Hawthorne Point through the East Security Gate. The naval installation sat near the North Carolina coast, surrounded by long stretches of pine trees and low suburban neighborhoods where American flags hung from porch columns. The base itself was a carefully ordered world of concrete buildings, training fields, administrative offices, and broad roads marked with white directional arrows. Everything appeared precise from the outside. That was why Eleanor had come without ceremony. Her driver had stopped the dark government sedan 1 block from the main building. Eleanor had stepped out alone, carrying only her notebook and a slim folder. Her aide, Commander Nora Bennett, had objected when Eleanor explained the plan earlier that morning. "They know an inspection team is coming," Nora had said. "They'll expect a senior officer." "They expect a uniform," Eleanor replied. "That may create confusion." "That is the purpose." Eleanor had looked through the window of the sedan at the quiet streets outside the base. A grocery store stood across from a row of modest houses. Parents were loading bags into their cars. A cyclist waited at a traffic light. Beyond them, the entrance to Hawthorne Point rose behind a line of trimmed hedges. "I don't want to see how they behave when they know I'm watching," Elena said. "I want to see how they behave when they believe I don't matter." Nora had studied her for a moment before nodding. Elena's decision was not impulsive. For 6 months, her office had received inconsistent reports from Hawthorne Point. The official evaluations described an efficient command with excellent readiness scores, strong training results, and unusually low levels of internal conflict. The anonymous surveys told a different story. Junior personnel described a place where recognition flowed upward and responsibility flowed downward. They spoke of ideas being dismissed because of who presented them, promotions being shaped by personal connections, and mistakes being handled differently depending on the name attached to them. None of the concerns involved dramatic misconduct. They were smaller than that, quieter and harder to prove. A missed meeting invitation, a training opportunity given repeatedly to the same circle, a complaint acknowledged but never answered, a talented specialist assigned routine work because a supervisor had already decided what she was capable of doing. Eleanor knew institutions rarely weakened through one enormous failure. They weakened through 1,000 minor decisions that taught people to stop speaking. At the gate, she presented a standard identification card. The guard checked it, gave her directions to the reception hall and waved her through. Eleanor thanked him and continued on foot. The air carried the faint smell of salt from the coast. A late afternoon breeze moved through the pine trees, lifting the ends of her dark hair. She walked past 2 office buildings and a training center before reaching the main administrative complex. Inside, the atmosphere felt different. People moved quickly through the corridors. Doors opened and closed. Staff members carried folders, adjusted decorations, and checked lists attached to clipboards. The reception for the inspection delegation was scheduled for 5 o'clock, and every visible detail had been prepared to create an impression of calm efficiency. Elena noticed what had not been prepared. A junior sailor stood near a printer, trying to explain to a lieutenant commander that the updated briefing packets had been placed in the wrong conference room. "Then move them," the officer said without looking at her. "I already did, sir. I just wanted to confirm which version—" "Use your judgment." The sailor nodded, though Eleanor could see from her expression that she had been asking precisely because two conflicting instructions had been given. Farther down the hall, two officers passed an enlisted technician carrying a large equipment case. Neither moved aside. The technician pressed himself against the wall to let them through. No one was openly cruel. That was what made the scene important. The hierarchy had become so automatic that courtesy seemed to move in only one direction. Eleanor entered the reception hall at 4:37 p.m. The room had high windows facing the water and framed photographs of ships along the walls. Round tables were arranged beneath white lights. Uniformed officers gathered in small groups, while civilian staff checked the refreshments and presentation screens. Near the far wall, a young woman in a communications uniform was attempting to connect a laptop to the main display. The screen flashed, went dark, and flashed again. A commander standing nearby sighed loudly. "Do we have anyone here who actually understands this system?" The young woman turned. "I understand it, sir. The adapter they provided isn't compatible with the updated port. I requested the correct one this morning." "And where is it?" "Supply sent it to the operations building." "Then perhaps you should have been more specific." The woman took a breath. "I included the room number and event name in the request." The commander had already turned away. Eleanor opened her notebook. She wrote the time, the room, and one sentence. Responsibility assigned without authority. Blame assigned without inquiry. The communications specialist noticed Elena watching and offered a polite smile. "Are you with the visiting delegation, ma'am?" In a manner of speaking. "I'm Petty Officer Maya Santos. I apologize that the screen isn't ready." "You don't need to apologize to me." Maya glanced toward the commander. "It will be working before they arrive." "I believe you." The simple statement seemed to surprise her. Elena had seen that expression many times before. It was the look of someone who had become accustomed to explaining herself before anyone had asked a fair question. Maya returned to the equipment. Elena continued around the room. She recognized several names from the reports. Commodore Richard Vance, the base commander, stood near the entrance speaking with local officials. He was polished, attentive, and skilled at making each person feel temporarily important. His evaluations described him as disciplined and strategically minded. Elena watched him accept praise for the reception arrangements, though she had already seen 3 junior personnel correcting details around him. At 4:42, Lieutenant Blake Harrington entered the hall. He was younger than Elena expected. 31, perhaps 32. His dress uniform was immaculate, and his posture carried the confidence of someone who had been praised often and corrected rarely. 2 deployments and several successful training operations had made him one of Hawthorne Point's most visible officers. He moved through the room easily, greeting senior leaders by name. Junior personnel stepped aside before he reached them. Elena knew his record: excellent operational scores, strong recommendations, repeated descriptions such as decisive, commanding, and naturally influential. She also knew his name appeared indirectly in 5 anonymous survey responses. None accused him of serious wrongdoing. Instead, they described meetings where he interrupted others, accepted credit too easily, and treated unfamiliar people as obstacles until someone important introduced them. Harrington noticed Eleanor near the windows. At first, he looked away. Then he looked back. She wore no visible credentials beyond the small badge printed at the front desk. The badge read E. Reyes in plain black letters. He crossed the room toward her. "Excuse me," he said. Elena closed her notebook. "Yes?" "This area is reserved for the command reception." "I'm aware." He glanced at her badge. "Are you part of the catering staff, facilities, or outside administration?" "None of those." His smile remained, but its warmth disappeared. Then, who approved your access? I presented my identification at the gate. That isn't what I asked. Elena studied him. He was not angry. He was performing authority. Several officers nearby had noticed the exchange, and Harrington seemed energized by their attention. I'm exactly where I need to be, she said. He gave a brief laugh. That answer usually works better when someone knows who you are. A few people turned toward them. Elena heard Maya stop working behind her. Harrington pointed to the paper badge, E. Reyes. No organization, no title, no escort. You can understand why that creates questions. Questions are reasonable, Elena said. Assumptions are less useful. His expression tightened. What is your rank, ma'am? The word ma'am sounded more like a challenge than a courtesy. Elena could have answered. Instead, she asked, would the answer change how you speak to me? The nearby conversations faded. Harrington glanced toward his audience and smiled again. It would help determine whether you belong in a restricted reception. Belonging and rank are not the same thing. On a military base, they are often closely related. He reached toward her visitor badge. Elena stepped back before he touched it. That small movement stopped him for half a second. Lieutenant, Maya said from behind them. The guest list may have been updated. I can check. Harrington did not turn. I didn't ask you, petty officer. Maya became quiet. Elena looked at her. The young woman's shoulders had drawn inward, though she remained standing beside the equipment table. Harrington removed the badge from Elena's lapel, examined it, and let it fall. Here is what we're going to do, he said. You're going to wait outside while I ask security to verify your access. Elena looked down at the badge. Then she looked at him. Are you certain that is the decision you want to make? The question caused another ripple of amusement among the officers watching. Harrington mistook her calm for hesitation. He picked up an empty serving tray from a nearby table and extended it toward her. Or you can make yourself useful until someone identifies you. This time only one person laughed. Eleanor accepted the tray. She held it for 3 seconds, placed it carefully on the table, and opened her notebook. Harrington's expression shifted. What are you writing? The sequence of events. For whom? Before Eleanor could answer, the reception hall doors opened. 4 generals entered. Commodore Vance immediately stepped forward, smiling broadly. General Crawford, welcome to Hawthorne Point. The generals walked past him. Their attention had already settled on the woman in the navy blue suit, standing beside the fallen visitor badge. They stopped before her. 4 hands rose, and for the first time that afternoon, Blake Harrington understood that the person whose importance he had questioned was the one person in the room whose judgment could reach every level of his command. No one spoke for several seconds after the salute. The silence was not dramatic in the way Harrington would remember it later. There was no sudden music, no raised voice, no public announcement designed to humiliate him. What made it unbearable was its simplicity. Everyone understood the situation at the same time. Vice Admiral Elena Reyes stood before 4 senior leaders who had crossed the room specifically to acknowledge her. Commodore Vance remained near the entrance with one hand still half raised from the greeting they had ignored. Officers who had watched Harrington challenge her now looked at the floor, the walls, or anything that did not require meeting her eyes. Elena returned the salute. At ease, she said. The generals lowered their hands. General Crawford was the first to notice the paper badge on the floor. Her gaze moved from the badge to the empty serving tray and then to Harrington. She said nothing. She did not need to. Eleanor bent, picked up the badge and placed it inside her notebook. Commodore Vance, she said, I'll need the primary conference room. Vance seemed to recover part of his composure. Of course, Admiral. We have a complete presentation prepared. Readiness figures, retention data, training evaluations. We'll begin without the presentation. His smile weakened. Ma'am? I would like the unedited command climate surveys from the last 24 months, the complete assignment and promotion review records, and the response files for all internal concerns submitted during that period. The room remained quiet. Vance glanced briefly at Harrington. That is a significant amount of material. Yes. Some of those records may require administrative preparation. They should already exist. They do. Then no preparation is necessary. Vance nodded. Elena turned to Commander Nora Bennett, who had entered behind the 4 generals carrying a slim briefcase. Commander, establish the review team in the primary conference room. Begin with document preservation. No files are to be altered, reorganized, or supplemented after this moment without a dated notation. Yes, ma'am. Harrington finally moved. He took 1 step forward. Vice Admiral Reyes. Elena looked at him. His confidence had not vanished completely. It had become uncertain, pulled in opposite directions by pride and alarm. I owe you an apology, he said. Several people watched Elena, waiting for her response. She closed her notebook. You owe me accuracy, she said. Your apology can wait until you understand what happened. Harrington's face reddened. I misunderstood your identity. No, you understood exactly what you believed my identity to be. He opened his mouth, but Elena continued. You believed I was someone without authority. Your conduct followed from that belief. The issue is not that you failed to recognize a vice admiral. The issue is how quickly you decided that an unfamiliar visitor deserved less patience than a person whose title you respected. Her voice remained calm. That calm prevented the moment from becoming a confrontation. She was not punishing him in front of the room. She was naming the decision he had made. Harrington looked toward Vance, perhaps expecting support. The Commodore did not meet his eyes. Eleanor turned to the assembled personnel. This reception is concluded. All scheduled personnel will remain available for individual interviews. Those interviews will be private. No supervisor will be present while a subordinate speaks with the review team. A subtle change passed through the room. Some faces tightened, others lifted. Maya Santos stood beside the now functioning display screen. She looked directly at Elena for the first time since the generals had entered. Elena saw hope in her expression, but also caution. Hope without trust was fragile. It had to be handled carefully. The conference room overlooked the training fields behind the main building. By 5:20 p.m., the long table had been cleared of decorative folders and prepared meals. Laptops, secure recorders, and document boxes replaced them. Eleanor stood at the window while Nora organized the team. The evening light stretched across the base, turning the tops of the pine trees gold. Beyond the fence, cars moved along a suburban road. People were returning home from work, stopping at pharmacies, picking up children, and deciding what to make for dinner. Eleanor thought about her mother. Teresa Reyes had worked 6 days a week at the family laundry after immigrating from Iloilo. She had learned English by listening to local radio, writing unfamiliar words on paper receipts, and repeating them while steam rose from the pressing machines. Her father, Mateo, had repaired naval electronics at a civilian maintenance yard. He rarely spoke about ambition. He spoke about consistency. Do good work when someone is watching, he used to say. Do the same work when no one is. The notebook Elena carried had belonged to him. Its leather cover was scratched and softened by years of use. After his retirement, he had filled it with measurements, repair notes, and reminders to call relatives. When he gave it to Elena, only 20 pages remained blank. She had replaced the paper inside many times, but she never replaced the cover. Nora approached the window. The preservation order is active. Administrative systems are locked to read-only access. Any resistance? Questions. No direct resistance. Questions are allowed. Nora hesitated. Lieutenant Harrington asked whether he should obtain counsel before his interview. He may speak with anyone he is authorized to consult. He also asked whether this was a disciplinary investigation. It is a command review. What it becomes will depend on what the records show. Nora nodded, then glanced toward the door. Commodore Vance wants to speak with you privately. Not yet. He says he can provide context. Context should survive documentation. Nora almost smiled. Eleanor returned to the table. The 4 generals who had saluted her were not members of her staff. Each represented a branch participating in joint training at Hawthorne Point. Their presence had been planned because the base's decisions affected personnel across multiple commands. General Crawford opened a digital folder. The official reports are unusually positive, she said. 94% readiness, 89% personnel satisfaction. Almost no formal disputes. General Samuel Price leaned back in his chair. That is either exceptional leadership or exceptional filtering. Filtering leaves patterns, Elena said. The first records arrived 10 minutes later. 3 administrative assistants pushed carts loaded with boxes. Behind them walked an officer from personnel management, looking as though he had been asked to carry the walls of the building. Elena thanked the assistants. The officer blinked at her, apparently surprised. "Ma'am, these are the files currently designated as responsive." "Currently designated? There may be archived material." "Where?" He looked at Nora. "In separate storage." "Bring it." "Yes, ma'am." The review began with assignment records. Elena did not expect to find dramatic evidence. Decisions about training, recognition, and advancement were rarely written in language that revealed unfairness. They appeared reasonable, one at a time. The pattern emerged only when many decisions were placed beside one another. Within an hour, the team found the first inconsistency. Hawthorne Point operated an advanced leadership program that prepared junior personnel for future command roles. Over 2 years, 32 people had been selected. 26 had previously served under one of 4 senior officers. 23 had been personally recommended by Commodore Vance or Harrington. Several candidates with stronger evaluations had not been interviewed. Elena studied the list. "Where is Petty Officer Maya Santos?" Nora searched the database. She applied twice. Result? Not selected. Reason? Nora opened the review notes. First application: insufficient command presence. Second application: limited visibility among senior leadership. General Crawford looked across the table. She manages communications for command events. How much more visible could she be? Elena remembered Maya working alone behind the display equipment, while a commander blamed her for a supply error. Visibility is often another word for access, Elena said. At 6:40 p.m., the first interviews began. Elena instructed the team to start with junior personnel. Senior officers were accustomed to speaking first and framing the environment for everyone else. She wanted to hear from the people who usually waited. A seaman from facilities entered the room with stiff shoulders and careful answers. Everything was fine. Leadership was professional. Opportunities were available. Elena let him finish. Then she asked, "When was the last time you had an idea and decided not to share it?" The seaman looked at her. The question seemed to surprise him more than any accusation would have. "Last month," he said. "What was the idea?" "A new equipment check system. We lose time because different teams use different logs." "What happened?" "I started to explain it at a meeting. Lieutenant Harrington said I should focus on doing my current job correctly before redesigning everyone else's." "Was your current work incorrect?" "No, ma'am." "Did anyone review your proposal?" "No." "Do you still have it?" He nodded. "It's on my laptop." "Submit it to Commander Bennett before you leave." The seaman sat a little straighter. Elena asked about daily work, meetings, and access to training. His answers remained measured, but the details became more honest. The next person described being removed from a planning group without explanation. Another had applied for specialized training 3 times and never received feedback. A junior officer said Harrington frequently made decisions before meetings and used the meeting only to confirm them. None of the stories sounded severe on their own. Together, they described a command where people learned that initiative was welcome only from familiar voices. At 8:05 p.m., Maya Santos waited outside the conference room, holding a blue folder against her chest. Nora entered first. "Petty Officer Santos has requested an interview," she said. She brought documentation. Elena remembered the expression on Maya's face when she said, "I believe you." "Send her in." Maya entered and took the chair across from Elena. The room had emptied except for Nora and one recording specialist. Elena preferred fewer uniforms during sensitive interviews. "Would you like water?" Elena asked. "No, thank you." "Ma'am, you're not in trouble." "I know." But her hands tightened around the folder. Elena waited. Silence could be generous when it gave someone time to choose her own words. Maya placed the folder on the table. "I applied for the leadership program twice," she said. "I saw the records. The written reasons aren't the real reasons." "What are the real reasons?" Maya looked toward the recorder. "Lieutenant Harrington said I wasn't ready to represent the command." "When?" "After my first application. He said I was technically strong but too quiet, so I volunteered to brief at 3 planning meetings. Then he said I spoke too carefully and made the room lose momentum." "What happened after the second application?" "He said people had to know how to make themselves memorable." Elena leaned forward slightly. "What did you understand that to mean?" "That I needed to become more like him." The answer carried no bitterness, only exhaustion. Maya opened the folder. Inside were meeting notes, email requests, training evaluations, and copies of project proposals. The documents were arranged by date. "I started keeping these because the feedback kept changing," Maya said. "Whenever I improved one thing, a different reason appeared." Eleanor reviewed the first page. "Why did you continue applying?" Maya looked down at her hands. "My grandmother raised me for part of my childhood in California, while my parents worked long shifts. She used to say that a closed door still tells you where the room is." For the first time that evening, Elena smiled. "My father said something similar." Maya looked up. "I didn't know whether any of this mattered." "It matters." "Will it change anything?" Elena rested one hand on the blue folder. "That depends on whether the command is willing to learn why it stopped seeing people clearly." Maya nodded, though uncertainty remained in her eyes. Eleanor understood. Promises were easy inside conference rooms. Trust was built later, through decisions no one applauded. Outside the windows, the base had grown dark. Lights glowed along the roads and office buildings. Somewhere beyond the walls, personnel were checking phones, talking quietly, and wondering what the inspection would uncover. Elena opened her father's notebook to a clean page. At the top she wrote, "A system can appear calm because people feel heard, or because they have stopped speaking." By 9 o'clock, Blake Harrington had replayed the reception hall encounter so many times that each memory had begun to feel separate from the others. The visitor badge falling, the tray in his hand, the generals crossing the room, Elena Reyes looking at him without anger. He sat alone in a small briefing room on the first floor, still wearing his dress uniform. The overhead lights were too bright, and the empty chairs around him made the room feel larger than it was. He had apologized badly. He knew that now. He had said he misunderstood her identity, as if the problem had been a missing piece of information instead of the conclusion he had formed without it. Harrington had built his reputation on quick decisions. In training exercises, speed mattered. Hesitation cost time. People praised his ability to assess a situation and act before others had finished discussing it. No one had taught him that the same instinct could become carelessness when applied to people, or perhaps someone had tried. He remembered instructors telling him to listen before leading. He remembered a senior officer advising him that confidence without curiosity eventually became blindness. At the time, Harrington had considered those statements useful, but abstract. Now they felt specific. The door opened. Commodore Richard Vance entered and closed it behind him. Harrington stood. "Sir." "Sit." Vance remained standing. For the first time since Harrington had known him, the Commodore looked less polished than the room around him. His tie was slightly off-center, and the controlled confidence in his expression had thinned. "What exactly did you say to her?" Vance asked. Harrington looked at the table. "You were there." "I heard part of it." "You saw enough." Vance's jaw tightened. This is not the time for deflection. Harrington almost laughed at the irony, but he stopped himself. "I asked who she was. She wouldn't answer directly. I thought she had entered the reception without authorization." "And the tray?" Harrington said nothing. Vance stepped closer. "Do you understand what position you've placed this command in?" The question stirred something defensive in Harrington. "I made the mistake." "Sir?" "You made it publicly?" "Yes." "In front of a joint delegation?" "Yes. And now every decision involving you will be examined." Harrington looked up. Shouldn't those decisions survive examination? Vance stared at him. The words had come out before Harrington could reconsider them. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Then Vance lowered his voice. You need to be careful in your interview. Answer what is asked. Do not speculate. Do not turn an unfortunate interaction into a larger criticism of the command. Harrington understood the instruction beneath the instruction. Protect the structure that had protected him. A day earlier, he would have accepted without question. Now he remembered Elena asking whether her rank would change how he spoke to her. He also remembered Maya offering to check the guest list and the way he had silenced her without turning around. I'll answer accurately, he said. Vance's expression hardened. I expect loyalty. To what? The Commodore paused. Harrington had never challenged him that directly. To this command. Harrington looked around the empty briefing room. For years, loyalty at Hawthorne Point had meant keeping problems inside the building. It meant correcting stories before they reached senior leadership. It meant accepting that effective people deserved greater freedom because the command needed their results. Harrington had benefited from that definition. He had also helped enforce it. Vice Admiral Reyes said apologies should wait until people understand what happened, he said. Vance stepped back. Do not become philosophical now, Lieutenant. It won't help you. He left without another word. Harrington remained seated. The door closed softly, but the conversation stayed in the room. At 9:27 p.m., Commander Bennett escorted him upstairs. The conference room looked different without the full delegation. Eleanor sat at the far end of the table with Nora and a legal advisor. Harrington took the chair opposite them. A recorder rested between them. Eleanor explained the interview procedure in a steady voice. He would be told when the recording began. He could request clarification. He was expected to answer honestly. The purpose was to understand command practices, not to stage a public judgment. When the recorder activated, Eleanor opened her notebook. Lieutenant Harrington, describe what happened in the reception hall from the moment you first noticed me. Harrington had prepared several versions in his mind. He abandoned all of them. I saw someone I didn't recognize, he said. She had no listed organization on her badge. I assumed she had entered the event by mistake. What did you do? I asked why she was there. Is that all? No. He looked at the notebook. I treated the uncertainty as a challenge to my authority. Elena's eyes lifted. Explain. I asked your rank. When you didn't answer, I believed you were being difficult. Why? Because I expected an immediate response. Would you have expected the same response from a senior officer? No, ma'am. Why not? Harrington inhaled. Because I would have assumed the senior officer had a reason, and you did not assume I had one. No. Elena wrote something. Harrington continued before she asked another question. I removed your badge. I told you to wait outside. Then I gave you the tray. What was the purpose of the tray? To make a point. What point? He felt heat rise along his neck. That I controlled whether you remained in the room. Eleanor did not react. Did you believe you had that authority? I believed I had more authority than you. Based on what? Your clothing, the badge, the fact that you were alone, and because you did not recognize me. Yes. Eleanor folded her hands. Did anyone encourage you? No. Did anyone stop you? No. Did Commodore Vance observe the interaction? Harrington thought of the conversation downstairs. Yes. What did he do? Nothing. The words settled heavily between them. Eleanor asked about Maya's attempt to help. Harrington admitted that he dismissed her without hearing what she intended to say. Is that common? Eleanor asked. What? Interrupting Petty Officer Santos before she finishes. He hesitated. I don't know. Then think. Harrington remembered planning meetings, Maya presenting technical concerns, himself checking the clock, himself summarizing her point before she reached it, himself telling her to be more decisive, then speaking over her when she tried. Yes, he said quietly. It may be common. Why? She takes time to explain the details. Are the details useful? Usually. Then why interrupt? Because I already believe I understand where she is going. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. That appears to be a pattern. Harrington nodded. The interview continued for nearly an hour. They discussed leadership program selections, project assignments, and the informal group of officers who received the most visible opportunities. Harrington initially defended the choices as efficient. He selected people he trusted because important work required reliability. Elena asked how someone outside that group was supposed to earn trust without access to important work. He had no answer. By the end of the interview, Harrington felt as though every confident decision of the previous 3 years had been placed beneath a brighter light. Some survived. Others looked smaller than he remembered. Eleanor switched off the recorder. "You may return to your quarters," she said. "Remain available tomorrow." Harrington stood. "Ma'am." "Yes?" "I am sorry." Eleanor waited. This time he did not mention her rank. "I decided what kind of person you were before I knew anything about you," he said. "Then I used my position to make you prove you belonged in a room where I never questioned my own right to stand." Eleanor studied him. "That is more accurate. I don't expect forgiveness. This is not about forgiveness. What is it about? Whether understanding changes your next decision." Harrington nodded and turned toward the door. Before he left, Eleanor spoke again. "Lieutenant?" He looked back. "Confidence is valuable when it helps others move forward," she said. "When it makes everyone else smaller, it is no longer leadership." Harrington left the room alone. Across the hall, Maya sat in a waiting area speaking with Nora. A blue folder rested on her lap. For the first time, Harrington wondered how many times she had tried to tell him something he had already decided he understood. Maya looked up as he passed. He stopped. She became guarded immediately. Harrington wanted to apologize. But Elena's words returned to him. "Apologies should wait until you understand what happened." "I won't take much of your time," he said. Maya waited. "I reviewed your proposals for the leadership program." Her eyebrows rose slightly. "Tonight?" "No, before the selections." "And?" "I remember thinking they were too detailed." "They were planning proposals." "I know." Maya closed the folder. Harrington searched for the right words. "I used detail as evidence that you lacked decisiveness. But when I presented similar plans, people called them thorough." She studied him carefully. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because it was not a fair standard." Maya did not thank him. She did not reassure him. She simply said, "No, it wasn't." Harrington nodded. Then he continued down the hall. Maya watched him leave before turning back to Nora. "Do you think he meant that?" she asked. Nora glanced toward the empty corridor. "He may mean it tonight." "That isn't the same as changing." "No," Nora said. "It isn't." Inside the conference room, Eleanor reviewed the final notes from the interviews. The command's problem was becoming clear. Hawthorne Point had not been shaped by one cruel leader or one dramatic failure. It had been shaped by convenience. Senior officers trusted familiar people. Familiar people received opportunities. Opportunities created visibility. Visibility produced more trust. Everyone outside the circle was told to become more visible without being given a place to stand. Eleanor opened her notebook. Beneath the sentence about silence, she wrote another line. "People do not always close doors deliberately. Sometimes they simply keep inviting the same people inside." The next morning arrived beneath a grey coastal sky. Rain tapped lightly against the windows of Hawthorne Point's administrative building. The roads outside shone beneath the streetlights, and personnel hurried between buildings with folders held over their heads. Elena had slept for 3 hours in the visiting officers' quarters. At 5:30, she was awake. By 6, she sat at a small desk near the window, reading Maya Santos's documents while the base slowly came back to life. The blue folder contained 2 years of careful work. Maya had designed a communications continuity plan that would reduce delays between joint units during large training exercises. She had identified repeated equipment conflicts, scheduling gaps, and inconsistent reporting methods. Her proposals were detailed because the problem was detailed. Each rejection used a different explanation: too cautious, insufficient presence, limited leadership exposure, needs broader command recognition. No document identified a technical weakness in her work. Elena read the final page twice. It was an email Maya had sent to the Leadership Program Coordinator after her second rejection. "Thank you for reviewing my application. I would appreciate specific guidance on measurable improvements I can make before applying again." The response contained 2 sentences. "Continue demonstrating initiative in your current role. Future opportunities will be considered as appropriate." Elena knew the language well. It sounded professional while promising nothing. At 7, Nora arrived carrying coffee for herself and hot tea for Elena. "The archived files were delivered," she said. "They were stored in the operations building." "Why?" "The personnel director says they were moved during a records reorganization." "When?" 3 days ago." Elena looked up. "After notice of the inspection?" "Yes." "What was moved?" "Unresolved feedback forms, candidate appeals, and several informal concern reports." "Any files missing?" "We are comparing indexes now." Nora placed a printed chart on the desk. "There is something else." The chart showed assignment data for high-visibility operations. Across 30 major exercises, the same 12 officers repeatedly appeared in planning leadership roles. Their performance reviews then cited those roles as evidence of superior initiative. "It feeds itself," Nora said. "Yes." "Do you think Vance designed it?" Elena considered the question. "Not necessarily. Systems can become unfair without anyone sitting down to design unfairness. But once leaders see the pattern, failing to correct it becomes a decision." At 8, Commodore Vance entered the primary conference room for his interview. He wore a fresh uniform and carried a thick binder. His composure had returned. "Vice Admiral Reyes," he said, "I prepared a summary that may clarify several of the issues raised yesterday." Elena gestured toward the chair. "We'll discuss the original records first." Vance sat. The recorder began. For 40 minutes he defended the command's practices. Hawthorne Point operated under constant pressure. Senior leaders needed people who could act quickly. Opportunities went to personnel with proven records. Informal concerns were often resolved through conversation, because not every workplace disappointment required formal review. His answers were reasonable in isolation. Elena placed Maya's 2 leadership applications on the table. "Why was Petty Officer Santos not selected?" Vance glanced at the first page. "I was not personally involved in every candidate review. Your signature appears on both final lists. I approved recommendations from the selection panel." "Who selected the panel?" "I did." "Who defined the criteria?" "The program office under my authority." Elena placed the assignment chart beside the applications. 26 of 32 candidates previously worked directly for 4 senior officers. "Do you consider that representative of the command?" Vance studied the chart. "It may reflect where the strongest candidates were assigned, or where the strongest assignments were given. That is an interpretation. It is a question." Vance adjusted the binder. Leadership potential is difficult to reduce to numbers, which is why transparent reasoning matters. We cannot promote everyone who feels overlooked. No one suggested that. Elena's tone remained even. "The issue is whether your process allowed people outside a familiar circle to demonstrate potential." Vance leaned back. "I believe it did." "Show me." He looked at the documents again. Elena waited. The silence lasted nearly 20 seconds. Finally, Vance said, "The process may benefit from refinement. Why were unresolved concern reports moved to another building after notice of this inspection?" His eyes lifted. "That was a routine records reorganization." "Who ordered it?" "The personnel director." "On whose authority?" Vance paused. "Mine." "Why?" "The administrative offices needed to present current files efficiently." "Current files or favorable files?" His expression tightened. "I reject that implication." Then provide another explanation. Vance opened his binder. Elena closed it with one hand. We are not discussing the prepared summary. For the first time, his composure cracked. You arrived without identification appropriate to your office, he said. You allowed an avoidable misunderstanding to become evidence against my command. Nora looked toward Eleanor. Eleanor remained still. Did my clothing cause Lieutenant Harrington to remove my badge? No. Did it cause him to dismiss Petty Officer Santos when she attempted to assist? No. Did it move the archived records? No. Then my clothing is not the subject of this review. Vance looked toward the window. Rain streaked the glass behind Elena. I have led this base successfully for 4 years, he said. Our readiness scores are among the best in the region. Readiness is not only the ability to complete today's mission, I am aware. It is also the ability to develop the people who will lead tomorrow's. Vance's mouth formed a thin line. Eleanor placed one final document before him. It was a resignation request from a systems specialist named Daniel Cho. He had been one of Hawthorne Point's highest-rated technical employees. His reason for leaving was listed as personal preference. During the previous night's interview, Daniel had explained that he left after 3 rejected requests for advanced training. Each time, the opportunity went to someone with less experience but stronger relationships with senior officers. Did you know why he left? Eleanor asked. I cannot know every individual motivation. Did anyone ask him? Exit procedures were completed. That was not my question. Vance looked down at the resignation form. No. Elena switched off the recorder. The interview was finished. Vance remained seated. What happens now? He asked. The team will complete its review. To my command? To the decisions made under it. Will I be removed? Elena studied the man across from her. His fear was real, but it was still centered on his position. That decision will be made after the findings are complete. Vance gathered his binder. At the door, he stopped. I was trying to maintain excellence. Elena believed him. That was part of the problem. Excellence that depends on the same people receiving every opportunity is not sustainable, she said. Vance left. Later that morning, Elena walked through the communications department with Maya. The workspace occupied the second floor of a low building near the training fields. Desks stood in orderly rows beneath fluorescent lights. Maps, equipment schedules, and technical diagrams covered the walls. Maya explained the daily operations. She spoke differently here. Her voice was clearer, faster, and more confident than it had been in the conference room. She knew every system, every deadline, and every point where one unit depended on another. When a technician asked about a signal routing issue, Maya answered without checking notes. Elena observed the other personnel. They listened to her, not because of rank, because she understood the work. At one desk, Maya opened the continuity plan that had been rejected. This is the newest version, she said. I kept updating it even after the second application. Why? The problem still existed. Elena smiled slightly. Her father would have liked that answer. Maya displayed a map showing communication links between units. Several routes overlapped unnecessarily, creating delays whenever one system went offline. Your proposal reduces duplication, Elena said, and gives each unit a backup path. Has it been tested? Only in simulation. Why? I don't have authority to schedule a live test. Elena looked toward Nora. Who does? Lieutenant Harrington's operations group, Nora replied. Maya's expression changed. She had not expected the conversation to move so quickly. Elena turned back to her. Prepare a controlled test for tomorrow. Morning, Maya blinked. Ma'am? Use the standard approval process. Commander Bennett will ensure the request is reviewed on its technical merits. I can have it ready. I know. As Elena and Nora left the building, Harrington was approaching from the opposite direction. He stopped and saluted. Elena returned it. Lieutenant, she said, Petty Officer Santos will submit a proposal for a live communications test. Harrington's eyes shifted toward the building. I'm familiar with the proposal. Then the review should be efficient. Yes, ma'am. Evaluate the operational risks. Do not evaluate whether her presentation style resembles yours. Harrington accepted the correction. Understood. Elena continued walking. Behind her, Harrington entered the communications building. Maya was still standing beside the display map when he reached her desk. She closed the file automatically. You don't have to do that, he said. Do what? Hide the work when I walk in. I wasn't hiding it. He knew she was being polite. Harrington pulled a chair from the next desk but did not sit until Maya nodded. Vice Admiral Reyes said you're submitting the test request. Yes. I reviewed the earlier version last year. I know. I rejected it. I know that too. He looked at the map. At the time, I said it added too many moving parts. It removes 3 communication transfers. I see that now. Maya waited. Harrington pointed to one of the backup routes. What happens if the coastal relay is unavailable? The inland station takes priority. And if both are unavailable, we return to the current system. So the test can be reversed immediately. Yes. Harrington leaned closer to the map. For the next 20 minutes, they discussed the proposal. Maya answered every question. When she did not know something, she said so and wrote it down. Harrington noticed that her careful style did not slow the conversation. It prevented them from pretending uncertain details were settled. At the end, he stood. I'll approve the test request. Maya looked at him. Because Vice Admiral Reyes told you to. No. Would you have approved it yesterday? Harrington considered lying. No. Why not? Because I would have spent more time evaluating whether you sounded confident than whether the system worked. Maya folded her arms. That is difficult to hear. It should be. She looked at the map again. One approved test does not fix the selection process. I know. One apology does not change how meetings work. I know. And I don't need you to become unusually supportive because an admiral is watching. Harrington nodded. What do you need? The same standard. He looked at her. Not a lower one, Maya said. Not a special one. The same one. Harrington understood that she was offering no easy redemption, only a measurable request. The same standard, he repeated. Outside, the rain began to ease. A pale line of sunlight appeared over the training fields, reflecting against the wet pavement. From the second-floor window, Elena watched personnel emerge from buildings and continue their ordinary work. No applause followed the morning's discoveries. No single conversation transformed Hawthorne Point. Change, she knew, rarely announced itself. It began in smaller moments, a document finally reviewed, a question allowed to finish, a person evaluated by the quality of her work instead of her resemblance to those already in the room. Nora joined her at the window. You gave Harrington responsibility for reviewing Maya's test. Yes. Some people may think that gives him another opportunity he hasn't earned. It gives him accountability. And if he fails? Then we will have clearer evidence of what he chooses when the standard is visible. Nora watched Harrington and Maya through the communications building window. Do you believe people change that quickly? No. Then what do you believe? Elena looked down at her father's notebook. That people reveal whether they are willing to begin. The communications test began at 8 o'clock the following morning. The sky had cleared overnight, leaving the base washed in bright coastal sunlight. Puddles remained along the edges of the training fields, and water dripped from the pine branches whenever the wind moved through them. Maya stood inside the central operations room, wearing a headset and holding a clipboard. 3 units were participating. 2 operated from Hawthorne Point, while a third had established a temporary station 12 miles inland. The purpose was simple: test whether Maya's revised routing system could maintain communication during a simulated equipment interruption. For Maya, nothing about the morning felt simple. Vice Admiral Reyes observed from the back of the room with Nora and 2 technical evaluators. Harrington stood near the main console, responsible for authorizing each phase of the test. Maya had worked until late the previous evening checking every sequence. She knew the plan. She trusted the plan. What she did not trust was the attention surrounding it. For 2 years, her work had been nearly invisible. Now a vice admiral, 4 senior commands, and half of Hawthorne Point seemed interested in whether a signal moved successfully from one station to another. At 7:58, Harrington approached. "You're in control of the technical sequence," he said. Maya adjusted her headset. "I know. I'm not going to interrupt unless there is a safety or operational concern." She looked at him. "Thank you." He nodded and stepped back. "At exactly 8, Maya began. "Primary station. Confirm readiness. Primary ready. Inland station. Ready. Secondary unit. Ready." Her voice remained calm. The first stage proceeded without difficulty. Standard messages passed through the existing route. At 8:12, Maya instructed the technical team to disable the primary coastal relay. A warning appeared on the main display. The system redirected automatically. For 3 seconds, no message arrived. Maya's stomach tightened. Then the inland station confirmed receipt. A technician raised his thumb. The room remained professional, but Maya sensed the shift in attention. People leaned toward the screens. "Proceed to phase 2, she said. The second phase added simulated traffic from 2 additional teams. Under the old system, the increase would have required manual coordination. Maya's routing plan distributed the load automatically. The messages continued. At 8:27, an unexpected error appeared. One of the backup channels failed to authenticate. Maya stared at the code. This had not occurred in simulation. A technician looked toward Harrington. Harrington looked at Maya. He did not take control. "What do you need?" he asked. 30 seconds. "You have it." Maya reviewed the system map. The failed authentication was not a design problem. One inland unit was using an outdated access profile. "Switch inland station 2 to reserve credentials," she said. The technician entered the change. The channel reopened. Communication resumed. The evaluator beside Elena wrote rapidly. At 8:41, the test concluded. Every required message had reached its destination. The average delay fell by 42%. For 1 quiet second, Maya simply stood before the screens. Then the operations room filled with restrained applause. She removed her headset. Harrington approached first. "The system works," he said. "The system can still improve." That wasn't a criticism. "I know." He extended the test report toward her. "You should sign as project lead." Maya looked at the signature line. In previous projects, Harrington's name had appeared first because the operations group authorized the work. This time he had crossed out his own name and written hers above it. She signed. Elena watched from the back of the room. The gesture did not erase anything. It did not prove Harrington had transformed. It showed only that in one visible decision, he had chosen not to take ownership of work that belonged to someone else. Beginnings were small. After the test, the review team returned to the conference room for the final day of document analysis. The missing pattern was now complete. Hawthorne Point's official reports were technically accurate. Readiness was high. Training exercises succeeded. Deadlines were met. But those results were being maintained by concentrating opportunity and authority among a narrow group. Junior personnel outside that circle performed essential work without receiving the experience needed for advancement. When they asked for guidance, the feedback was subjective and constantly shifting. The system had not collapsed. It had become dependent on too few people. That dependency placed the base's future at risk. Elena prepared preliminary recommendations. The leadership selection process would be suspended and redesigned with published criteria. Candidate reviews would include independent members from outside Hawthorne Point. High-visibility assignments would rotate among qualified personnel. Every rejected applicant would receive specific, measurable feedback. Internal concern reports would remain in a centralized system and could not be moved or closed without a documented explanation. Commodore Vance would be temporarily reassigned while Regional Command reviewed his leadership decisions. The recommendation regarding Harrington was more complicated. Several team members expected Elena to remove him from all leadership duties immediately. His reception hall conduct had been arrogant and unprofessional. His influence over selections had contributed to the closed system. Yet the review found no single offense that defined the entire problem. Eleanor did not want symbolic punishment to replace structural correction. She recommended that Harrington be removed from the leadership selection panel and placed under formal development review for 6 months. He would attend facilitated command training, participate in transparent assignment evaluations, and submit written justification for key personnel decisions. He would also work under a new operations supervisor from outside his usual circle. General Crawford read the recommendation. Some will say this is too lenient. Others will say it is excessive. What do you say? That consequences should address the behavior and protect the institution. He embarrassed you publicly. This is not my personal case. Crawford leaned back. Would you make the same recommendation if he had treated a civilian employee that way? Yes. That answer mattered more than the rest. Eleanor's authority could not be used to avenge an insult that would have been ignored if directed at someone less powerful. The standard had to remain the same. At noon, the preliminary findings were presented to the senior staff. Hawthorne Point's department heads sat around the long table. Maya attended as the communications representative, though she initially tried to give the seat to her supervisor. Elena asked her to remain. Commodore Vance sat near the center. He listened without interruption as Elena described the patterns. When she announced his temporary reassignment, his face became still. "Will I have an opportunity to respond?" he asked. "Yes." "Before the recommendation is final?" "Yes." He nodded once. For all his flaws, he accepted the decision with composure. Harrington received his development review without protest. After the meeting, he remained behind while others left. Maya gathered her papers at the opposite end of the table. Harrington approached Eleanor. "I understand the recommendation," he said. "Do you?" "I'm being given 6 months to prove I can lead differently." "No." He looked confused. "You are being given 6 months to practice leading differently," Eleanor said. "Proof is not a performance for senior officers. It is what the people around you experience repeatedly." Harrington glanced toward Maya. "She may never trust me. That is not a result you can demand. What can I do?" "The work." He nodded. Maya passed them on the way to the door. Elena called her name. "Petty Officer Santos." Maya stopped. "The Regional Communications Office has requested a full report on this morning's test. I'll prepare it. They also want you to present the findings next month." Maya's eyes widened. "In Norfolk?" "Yes." "I've never presented at a regional command meeting." "Then it will be your first time." Maya looked at Harrington, perhaps expecting him to speak. He did not. The opportunity belonged to her. "I'll be ready," she said. "I believe you will." That afternoon, Elena walked alone to the edge of the base. A narrow path ran beside the water, separating the administrative complex from a row of training buildings. Small boats moved in the distance. Across the inlet, suburban houses stood beneath tall trees, their windows reflecting the sun. She called her mother. Teresa answered after 3 rings. "Eleanor?" "Hi, Mom." "You sound tired." "I am." "Did you eat?" Eleanor smiled. Her mother had asked the same question before every deployment, promotion ceremony, and major inspection. "Yes." "A full meal." "Most of one." "That is not the same." Elena sat on a bench facing the water. "How is the laundry?" "You know I sold it 12 years ago. You still call it the laundry." "Because the new owner changed the sign. The old name was better." They spoke for several minutes about ordinary things, a cousin's new house, a neighbor's garden. A church fundraiser Teresa had volunteered to organize despite insisting she was too busy. Then her mother asked, "Was the inspection difficult?" "Yes." "Bad people?" Eleanor watched sunlight move across the water. "No. Mostly people who became too certain." "That can be worse." Elena laughed softly. "You sound like Dad." "Your father sounded like me. He simply spoke louder." For a moment, neither woman said anything. Then Teresa asked, "Did they know who you were?" "Not at first." "And how did they treat you?" Eleanor thought of Harrington, the tray, and the fallen badge. "They taught me something useful." "That is not an answer. It is the answer I have right now." Her mother accepted that. Before ending the call, Teresa said, "Remember, Anak, a title can open a door, but it cannot teach you how to enter a room." After the call, Elena remained on the bench. Her mother had called her Anak, the Filipino word for child, as she always did when she wanted Elena to remember who she had been before the uniforms, the briefings, and the salutes. Eleanor opened her father's notebook. She turned to the page where she had written about silence and closed doors. Below those lines, she added, "Authority reveals character most clearly when it chooses restraint." Behind her, footsteps approached. Maya stood at the path holding the signed test report. "I'm sorry to interrupt, ma'am." "You're not interrupting." Maya sat at the far end of the bench. For a while, they watched the water. "Were you ever nervous before presenting?" Maya asked. "Every time." "You don't look nervous." "That is because I learned not to confuse feeling with instruction." Maya considered the words. "What does that mean?" "Fear can tell you a moment matters. It does not get to tell you that you are unprepared." Maya looked down at the report. "I keep thinking someone will realize they chose the wrong person. For the regional presentation, for all of it, the test worked, because the team did its job. You designed the system that allowed the team to succeed." Maya turned the report over in her hands. "What if I make a mistake in Norfolk?" "You will." She looked startled. Elena smiled. "Everyone does. The goal is not to enter the room without the possibility of error. The goal is to know that one error does not erase your right to be there." Maya slowly nodded. Across the water, a small patrol boat changed direction and moved toward the harbor. The inspection had not ended, but the base already felt different, not repaired, not transformed, only awake. For Elena, that was enough for the moment. A person could begin again after recognizing an error. A command could begin again after admitting that success had hidden its weaknesses. And a quiet young specialist could begin to see that her careful voice was not something she needed to replace before the world would listen. On the final morning of the inspection, the reception hall looked almost ordinary. The white tablecloths had been removed. The decorative signs were gone. Sunlight spread across the polished floor, revealing faint marks where tables had stood 3 nights earlier. Eleanor entered alone. She walked toward the place near the windows where Harrington had first approached her. For several seconds, she could hear the memory of the room as it had been. Polite conversation, hurried footsteps, the small laugh after Harrington questioned whether she belonged. Her visitor badge was still inside the leather notebook. She removed it and held it between her fingers. E. Reyes. No rank, no organization, only a name. She thought about how quickly people reached for labels when they wanted certainty. Officer, civilian, leader, assistant, important, unimportant. Labels helped institutions function. They also allowed people to stop looking. The doors opened behind her. Harrington entered carrying a folder. He stopped when he saw Eleanor. "Good morning, Ma'am." "Good morning." He approached carefully. "I submitted the first assignment review under the new format." He handed her the folder. Inside were the names of 6 personnel selected for an upcoming planning exercise. Each candidate had been evaluated against published technical and leadership criteria. The justifications were specific. Maya Santos was among them. Elena looked up. "Did she receive the position because of the inspection?" "No." "How do you know?" "Her performance scores are the highest in communications, and yesterday's test demonstrated coordination under pressure." "Why was that not enough before?" Harrington did not hesitate. "Because I confused familiarity with confidence." Elena closed the folder. "That sentence should remain with you." "It will." He looked toward the floor where the tray had fallen. "I've been thinking about what you said." "Which part?" "That proof is what people experience repeatedly." Elena waited. "I know I can behave correctly while senior command is watching," he said. "That is not difficult. The difficult part will be changing what I do when the room feels ordinary again. Yes. How do you know when you've changed? You usually don't. Harrington frowned slightly. Other people know first. He absorbed the answer. Eleanor returned the folder. Begin with meetings. Meetings? Notice who speaks. Notice who is interrupted. Notice which ideas receive questions and which receive immediate dismissal. Ordinary rooms create culture faster than formal speeches. Harrington nodded. Maya entered through the opposite doors carrying a laptop case. She saw them and slowed. The regional presentation rehearsal is in 10 minutes, she said. Harrington checked his watch. I'll be there. Maya looked at Elena. Commander Bennett said you might observe. I will. As they walked toward the conference area, Maya remained slightly ahead. Harrington did not try to take the laptop case or offer unnecessary advice. He simply followed. The rehearsal took place before 12 personnel from communications and operations. Maya stood at the front beside a large screen. Her first slide showed the original routing problem. Her second explained the revised system. Her third presented the test results. She spoke carefully, not slowly, carefully. There was a difference. Halfway through, an operations officer interrupted with a question about cost. Maya began answering, but the officer spoke again before she finished. Harrington raised one hand. Let her complete the answer. The room became quiet. Maya looked at him. Then she continued. The initial cost is lower than the annual maintenance loss created by duplicated equipment. The full comparison is on the next slide. She advanced the presentation. The numbers supported her explanation. Elena watched Harrington take notes. He had made a small choice in an ordinary room. No general saluted. No senior officer praised him. That made the choice more meaningful. After the rehearsal, Nora joined Elena in the hallway. The final report will take several weeks, she said. The preliminary actions can begin now. Regional Command approved the independent selection panel. And Vance? He will transfer to the Strategic Planning Office on Monday while the review continues. Elena looked through the glass wall into the conference room. Commodore Vance stood near the back, speaking with 2 department heads. His posture remained formal, but some of the certainty had left his expression. He noticed Elena watching and excused himself. Vice Admiral, he said when he reached the hallway. Commodore. I received the reassignment orders. I know. He looked through the glass at Maya's presentation team. I reviewed her continuity proposal last night. What did you find? That it should have been tested a year ago. Eleanor said nothing. Vance exhaled. I spent 4 years trying to make this. Command looked dependable. It is dependable. Then why does this feel like failure? Because dependability became something you protected instead of something you continued building. He glanced toward the personnel inside the room. I thought uncertainty weakened confidence. It can also create curiosity. I was not curious enough. No. The direct answer seemed to surprise him. Then he nodded. I intend to respond fully to the findings. That is your right. I also intend to recommend that the new process remain, regardless of what happens to my position. That would be useful. Vance straightened his jacket. Is that all you have to say? Eleanor understood what he was asking. He wanted either condemnation or reassurance. Something final. She offered neither. What you do next will say more than I can. Vance accepted the answer and returned to the room. At 11:30, Hawthorne Point's personnel gathered in the main auditorium for Elena's closing remarks. She stood behind a plain lectern. This time she wore her full uniform. 3 stars rested on each shoulder. Rows of ribbons crossed her chest. The room rose when she entered, then sat at her instruction. Harrington occupied a seat near the front. Maya sat with the communications department. Commodore Vance stood against the side wall. Elena looked across the auditorium. 3 days earlier, the visible symbols of her rank had been absent. Now they were impossible to miss. She wondered how many people believed the uniform explained why the reception hall encounter mattered. She wanted them to understand that it did not. This inspection began before most of you knew I had arrived, she said. That was intentional. The room remained still. A command does not reveal its values during a prepared presentation. It reveals them in ordinary decisions. Who receives an answer? Who receives an opportunity? Who is allowed to finish a sentence? Who is assumed competent? And who is asked repeatedly to prove it? She paused. Hawthorne Point is not a failed command. It is a successful command with habits that could eventually limit its future. Several people shifted in their seats. Success can hide weaknesses because results make familiar methods feel correct. But an institution cannot remain strong if the same small group receives every chance to lead, while others are told to become more visible from the edge of the room. Eleanor looked toward Maya. This week, a communications specialist demonstrated that careful preparation is not the opposite of leadership. It is one form of leadership. Maya lowered her eyes briefly. Elena turned toward Harrington. A confident officer demonstrated that recognizing an error is only the beginning. The meaningful question is whether that recognition changes ordinary behavior after attention moves elsewhere. Harrington held her gaze, and a senior command learned that protecting excellent numbers is not the same as developing excellent people. Vance remained motionless. The recommendations from this inspection will create new procedures. Procedures matter, but no policy can replace the daily choices that build trust. Elena rested both hands on the lectern. Rank defines responsibility. It does not define human worth. The sentence moved through the auditorium without applause. Elena preferred it that way. She continued, "You should not treat every unfamiliar person as though 4 generals may enter and salute them. You should treat every person with professionalism, because respect is not a reward reserved for authority." When she finished, the room stood. The applause began slowly and grew stronger. Elena stepped away from the lectern. She did not mistake applause for change. Applause belonged to the moment. Change belonged to Monday morning. Outside the auditorium, Maya waited near the doors. "Vice Admiral Reyes." Elena stopped. Maya held the blue folder. "I made a new copy of the regional presentation." "Good. I also applied for the redesigned leadership program." Elena smiled. "When is the review?" "Next month. Are you ready?" Maya considered the question. "I'm nervous. That was not what I asked." Maya smiled too. "Yes, ma'am. I'm ready." They walked together toward the main entrance. Nora waited beside the government sedan. Beyond her, the base continued its normal rhythm. Vehicles moved along the roads. Personnel crossed between buildings. A maintenance team repaired a sign near the gate. Harrington stood outside the operations building, speaking with 3 junior officers. One of them was explaining something with animated hand gestures. Harrington listened without interruption. Commodore Vance left the administrative building carrying a box of personal files. 2 staff members walked beside him. He was not leaving in disgrace. He was moving into a period of uncertainty that would require him to decide whether leadership had been part of his identity or merely part of his position. Eleanor reached the sedan. Before entering, she opened her notebook and removed the visitor badge. Maya looked at it. "You kept that?" "I keep useful reminders." "Of Lieutenant Harrington?" "Of myself." Maya seemed puzzled. Eleanor turned the badge over. On the blank back, she wrote one sentence. "Never become so accustomed to being recognized that you forget how it feels to be unseen." She placed the badge inside the notebook again. "Your grandmother was right," Elena said. "About closed doors?" "Yes. They still show you where the room is." Maya looked toward the buildings of Hawthorne Point. "And then?" "Then you decide whether to knock, build another entrance, or become the person who opens it from inside." Nora opened the car door. Eleanor entered and placed the leather notebook on the seat beside her. As the sedan moved toward the gate, Hawthorne Point receded behind rows of pine trees and low brick buildings. From a distance, the base looked unchanged. The same roads, the same training fields, the same flags moving in the coastal wind. But inside one conference room, a young woman's name now appeared at the top of a project she had designed. Inside one operations meeting, an officer who once spoke first had begun practicing how to listen. Inside one senior office, familiar procedures were being replaced by standards that could be explained, measured, and questioned. None of those changes were dramatic enough to become legend. They were more important than that. They were repeatable. Elena looked through the rear window until the gates disappeared. Her mother had told her that a title could open a door, but could not teach someone how to enter a room. Elena finally understood the rest of the lesson. True leadership was not entering first. It was noticing who had been left in the hallway, stepping aside, and holding the door long enough for them to walk through under their own strength.